Yes, Ms. Scott.
Dr. Wagstaff, I have a small number of questions to ask you from call participants. First of all, did you have any involvement in decision-making about whether surrogate testing for non-A, non-B should be introduced on a national level?
Only as part of the organisation, not a direct influence, no.
Looking back now, do you think that surrogate testing should have been introduced for non-A, non-B?
No, I don't think it should. I think that the weight of evidence was against it as a useful and reliable test. I mean, there were so many conflicting reports on the way the test panned out, in particular, at its predictability anyway. I remember that there were a series of articles produced at the time when it was under investigation by Harvey Alter in the States. He was initially producing results which suggested that there would be a considerable reduction in post-transfusion hepatitis if it were to be introduced as a wholesale surrogate test. But his later publication said that over a 3-year period, as compared with the 3-year period before testing, there was no material difference at all in post-transfusion hepatitis. So on balance, I think that I would still have gone with the concept that it was of dubious value.
I asked you questions about the testing arrangements on product that had been collected before testing was instituted in relation to HIV. I'm going to ask you the same questions in relation to hepatitis C. So was there retrospective testing carried out on donations collected prior to the September 1991 date when HCV testing was rolled out nationally at Trent?
In effect, yes, because we were selected as one of the test centres for evaluation. So before test results were being issued, we had knowledge of the HCV status of most of our donors coming in. So yes, we did have some knowledge already. The other thing to take into account is the way in which the interaction between transfusion centres and hospital blood banks worked in terms of supply. Working on a basis of supplying the hospitals with what they needed twice a week, it meant that turnover was extremely rapid, and the chances of hospitals having a stock of untested blood on their shelves were very small indeed. So the numbers involved weren't significant, but even so, the fact was that most of the stock that we had out in hospitals on the testing date had de facto been tested.
And is that partly because you've been testing since June?
Yes.
Could there have been product that was frozen before June in the transfusion centre and then sent out after September?
No.
As untested?
No.
Did you recall frozen product from hospital blood banks after September 91 to retest or discard?
Yes.
For HCV?
Yes.
You did the same for HCV as you did for HIV?
Yes.
So those are the questions that I have from call participants that I'm going to ask Dr. Wagstaff.
Thank you. Well, I just have one group of questions for you, and it arises out of something you haven't yet been asked about today, but it comes from your witness statement. If we can please get that up. and go to page, I'd better do it by paragraph number, paragraph 519, 519. It's witness WITN 6988001 at paragraph 519. Can we see if we can find that?
That's page 134.
Thank you. And you say this. Now, this is an answer to a question which asks, what role did you consider the TRTC, the Trent Regional Transfusion Centre, had or should have had in pushing for factor concentrates to be virally inactivated in the late 1970s and early 1980s? And what you say is there on the screen, paragraph 519. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, I do now, sir, yes.
The need for safe products has been self-evident since the 1940s, when the link between transfusion and some forms of hepatitis was acknowledged. And by some forms of hepatitis, you mean there what, serum hepatitis?
Yes, yes, indeed.
In the ensuing years, I'm certain that regional transfusion directors, including a representative from Trent, would stress this need with the director of BPL individually and at regular RTD meetings. Now, you don't dare say you did this. Do you recollect having done it yourself?
Yes, indeed. After I assumed the post of RTD, yes.
So, you didn't speak to pharmaceutical companies, but you did to the BPL. And what would you have hoped that BPL might have done?
I was hoping, and I think we all expected, that experimental work would be carried out to try to produce an effective and useful method of inactivation of the material being produced in the long run. You may remember, sir, that this experimental work and development work was mainly based at the subsidiary plasma fractionation laboratory based in Oxford.
Yes.
With the main producing plant being sited at Elstree. But during that time, during my time of tenure, I know that work was being carried out to try to produce a method of, in effect, sterilizing the products without completely removing their clinical efficacy.
You go on to deal, paragraph 520, it's the next paragraph, so perhaps we could have that up. And you say you consider the minutes of a meeting of the working party to advise on plasma supplies. We'd better just have a quick look at that so you can be reminded what you were talking about. It's I don't know if we have it, I hope we have it, CBLA 301565, CBLA 301565. And it's paragraph 3.2, review of recent trends underneath the heading, review of recent trends in yields of factor VIII. The need to produce hepatitis-free products in the future may act adversely against yields of factor VIII. You've, I think, interpreted this as actually meaning to read, the need to produce hepatitis-free products may act adversely against future yields of factor VIII. Is that
yes?
Is that
yes.
how you read it?
Yes, it was the fear, which was realized in the early stages, that attempts at, in effect, sterilizing the product meant that the final yield of factor VIII was so low as to be virtually clinically useless.
Yes. And if we go back then to what you say in the statement, paragraph 520, back to the previous slide, if we please. Back again, that's it, thank you. And the second paragraph, the last paragraph of paragraph 520, the need for such products, that is, hepatitis-free products, you say was well established at the time of this meeting in December 1981.
Yes.
For how long do you think that need had been established, roughly?
Virtually, since it was acknowledged that hepatitis could be and was spread by the products in question.
Yes, I see. Well, that's what I thought you meant, but thank you for clarifying. I don't know if any questions arise out of that for you, Ms. Scott.
So no, they don't.
Well, those are the questions that I ask.
So Mr. Corey Wright, I don't think has any questions for Dr. Wagstaff.
He's shaking his head.
And so, Dr. Wagstaff, is there anything that you would like to add to your evidence?
I would like, if I may, just to repeat now the opening remarks which I made on my written statement, if that would be acceptable.
Of course.
Would you like that brought up on the screen, Dr. Wagstaff?
As you will, as you will.
It's at page 1 of his witness statement, WITN 6988001. If you want it up, and if you're going to read from your copy, then we won't put it up.
Fine, it's there now. May I?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, sir. I began my career in hematology when fresh frozen plasma was the only treatment for haemophilia. I saw lives improved with the advent of cryoprecipitates, and indeed I administered the first dose given to a patient in my local haemophilia centre. Then I saw the introduction of effective factor VIII concentrate and witnessed the dramatic changes it offered to patients and their families. It came as a complete shock and horror when those of us involved in any way in this treatment, both clinicians and patients, became aware that the dream was turning into a nightmare for all concerned, and that patients were being made gravely, even fatally ill by the therapy we had provided. Even after efforts to exclude risky blood donations, and after the introduction of HIV screening of donors, the nightmare continued for patients with the realization that there still existed the potential transmission to them of what came to be called the hepatitis C virus. This was eventually countered by the implementation of HCV tests, but many patients had already been left with a permanent illness, sometimes progressing fatally. I hope that my statement is a fair representation of the activities of the blood services at that time and of my involvement in them. Unfortunately, memories tend to fade, and the events of 30 to 40 years ago are not necessarily recalled with clarity. I am grateful for the documents provided to me by the inquiry team, which have been of great help in formulating my answers. I wish to take this opportunity to express my sorrow for all the pain and suffering suffered and caused by these tragic events. Those of us who work to keep the nation's supply of blood as safe as possible are especially sorry that the improvements in safety did not come sooner. May I also express my admiration for the way in which affected patients and families have given their evidence to the inquiry. It cannot have been easy to live through those terrible experiences again, but they have done so with great dignity. My apologies go especially to them. Thank you, sir.
Well, my admiration, it's a different sort of admiration perhaps, but it goes to you, if I may say so, particularly when I reflect that you told us this morning that you've been retired throughout the whole of this century so far, and yet you've managed to answer the questions with a degree of energy and focus which has missed many who've come before us in the inquiry. I have to say you have a magnificent way with words and the way in which you are able to use them to answer the questions. And you have been particularly helpful because you have spanned such a long period, 1956, 57 onwards, through to 1998 in practice, when for the earlier part at any rate, there are few who are now available to tell us what you have been able to tell us from personal recollection, and it's plain, despite what you say in those opening remarks about memory, that you do have a remarkable memory, and I'd just like to thank you for helping us with the benefit of that.
Thank you, sir.
Now, Ms. Scott. Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, we are hearing evidence from Professor Barbara, who will be giving evidence remotely, but COVID restrictions permitting, counsel to the inquiry will be in the hearing room.
Thank you. So tomorrow at 10 o'clock, Professor Barbara. Thank you very much.